morning. It's been so long. We've had a super full and delicious time. Here in New Zealand, it's summer, and a big part of our summer is running a camp for unschoolers. So this year we had 200 folks come along to our farm for a unschooling camp, which was amazing, but it really does fill up quite a big part of our summer. And of course, I've been running my unschooling support work, which you can check out below. But right now I'm getting back into the YouTube scene because I've got so much to share. And this morning I am going to be having a little chat with Iris Chen, who I'm just waiting for. She's just about to come on. Here she is, actually. So Iris Chen is the author of a new book called Untigering. You might have seen her work online because she's been running the Untigering platform for a really long time. She's amazingly wise and she's right here, so I'm just going to admit her. So, Iris, your book, Untigering, well, firstly, your whole name of Untigering is just so exceptional because you immediately understand what this is about. And this book is really your personal journey of going from kind of punitive, controlling, kind of tiger parenting to basically allowing yourself to emerge into a more connection-based, kind of gentle, empathetic kind of holding and raising of your children. It's really beautiful, and I love how you are so honest in this book. I a few times almost like splurted my cup of tea with your honest stories about your movement from that kind of hyper controlling, hyper punitive into this kind of gentle mode. The bit that I'm really curious about, you talk a little bit about it at the start, about the actual process and the kind of healing. And you say for you, you kind of almost held as a mantra the word delight. And that became like a sort of central theme to how you now wanted life to feel for you and your kids. And I'm just wondering if you can talk to me more about the actual healing from that to this, because obviously you don't just wake up as a tiger parent. You're a tiger parent because of everything you have received and the wounds that you're carrying. So what was particularly healing?
Yeah, there's so much, like you said, it's just such a huge process. But I do think that word delight was something that even when my kids were really little, it was something that I was working through because it was something that I never felt like I experienced in my own relationship with my parents. And I also grew up in like a very conservative Christian environment. And so this idea of God, my relationship with God, there was also not this sense of delight. It was a lot of obedience, a lot of duty, a lot of those things. And so this idea of being reparented into a relationship that is based on unconditional love and acceptance, and not on my behavior, not on whether or not I perform in certain ways or meet somebody's expectations, but just because I am, just because I exist, that I am worthy of love, that was a huge, personal journey for me to come to that place. And then once I, sort of rested in that truth and in that reality more and more, then I saw how I was relating to my kids, and it just didn't jive anymore, right? Like when you understand more about unconditional love and you see what you're doing to your kids, and you're recognizing that is not what love looks like. Like, love doesn't send you to your room and isolate you when you've done something wrong. Love doesn't take away something to make you feel bad. You know, all these things that I was doing, it just was not consistent with that ground and that foundation of unconditional love anymore. So experiencing that for myself, you know, reparenting myself into this foundation of love really helped me to recognize that I wanted that in my relationship with my children as well. And through that filter, a lot of things didn't make sense anymore. Like, I just couldn't continue doing them because I knew they were inconsistent with that experience.
That's so beautiful to hear that it can work that way around, that because for me it was the other way around. I found myself coming at parenting from a kind of rights-based perspective, I guess a kind of justice perspective, because of my leaning towards that, and so kind of came at it from that angle, began parenting them in this way. And it was honestly probably a few years before I realized that I deserved that as well. You know, that I could be unconditionally loved and accepted, and that I had a worthiness and could hold boundaries and that kind of thing. So it happened the other way around for me. So it's really beautiful to hear of all the different entry points, and actually gives me a little boost of faith that things can change. Because if anything is going on right now, I would say there is a massive awakening around caring for ourselves and loving ourselves, would you say? And it's like, God, maybe that's going to be the entry point for lots of parents, you know?
Yeah. I actually was reading over part of my book, and I think I did say at one point that, you know, learning to love and accept ourselves was foundational to learning to do that for our kids. And yet, like you said, you know, that was my experience, but I do believe it can go the other way around, and just our unconditional love for our children can wake us up to the ways that our inner child deserve that too. So yeah, I love that you pointed that out.
Yeah, that there's so many ways. It's another thing that can't be controlled. And in your answer just then, you said this wasn't consistent. My parenting wasn't consistent with love and kind of unconditional love. And it just brought me to mind of the parts in your book where you're really pulling to shreds the myths that punitive parenting is based on. So, you know, you have to be consistent. And I love how you just phrase that then, because it's like we hold up consistency. It's like, you've got to be consistent, you know, and it's like, consistent with what, actually? What if consistency wasn't about just doing the same thing to your children when this happens every time, but instead the question was, is this consistent with love? Imagine if we reframed that whole consistency myth to be about, is this consistent with my wider principles of love, radical acceptance? You know, like, actually that's what we're talking about when we say consistent.
Yeah, I love how you make that connection, because yeah, when we think about consistency, we think about like these rigid rules, right? We need like, oh, they always need to know what to expect when they do this. And yeah, just have it be more like this, a scaffold, and more of, yeah, like our values and our principles and our philosophies that create a framework, but that that we want to be consistent with that, but just these little minute details about schedules and rules and stuff, like, no, that's not what we were talking about when we're talking about consistency.
Yeah. So in your book, you ask us to rethink consistency, you ask us to rethink control, And I guess that is one of the massive ones, right? It's this idea that we think parents should always be in control at all times. And you gave a really good example of loosening the reins of control around bedtime. And I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Right. So for many, many years, my kids went to bed at 7:30 on the dot every night. And, to me, I thought it was wonderful. It was like I could have my evenings free and the kids would just go down. And then I think as I began this journey of unschooling and of, peaceful parenting, I just saw how that really violated their bodily autonomy, that didn't respect, that didn't teach them to listen to their own bodies, to, to be sensitive to what was happening around them or to the situation. And so we just decided to give them more freedom in that area, like respect their autonomy, honor their freedom. So I don't remember how old they were. They were probably like 8 and 10 or maybe a little bit younger, but just pulling back and saying, our bodies need rest. It's good for us to get the sleep that we need, but we're going to be here to support you in listening to your body, in order, so that you can choose your bedtime. Mommy and daddy are not going to decide for you. You can listen to your body, see when you're tired, and go to bed when it feels right for you. And so the first few weeks, they were like, yeah, free reign, we can stay up as late as we want. And they did, push the boundaries a little bit just to test us to see if, are they really going to respect, right? Or respect my decision to sleep whenever I want to. So yeah, oftentimes they would stay past even, our bedtime. And so we would say, okay, good night, we're going to go to bed. And they would stay up doing whatever. And then I think after that, when they realized that we did really respect them, that we did really want to honor their decisions, then they stopped sort of reacting to that need to express their freedom and that resistance to control. And then they were much more able to then focus on attuning to their bodies. And so, they would sometimes would take naps in the middle of the day if they were tired, or they would just go to bed when they felt like it, which was at a reasonable hour. It wasn't crazy, it wasn't 2 a.m. or whatever. It was like 8 o'clock, right? They would feel in their body that they were tired. And so, even now, they're obviously older now. They're 10 and 12, going on 11 and 13. And so we don't put them to bed at 7:30 anymore, but they're definitely listening to their bodies. Like my oldest, he is often tired earlier than my youngest. And so he'll go to bed first, and my youngest will stay up and read or whatever and go to bed when he feels tired. So I really have seen how just providing support, providing information and guidance, and the freedom to experiment and adjust and explore really does help them to be more attuned to their bodies and make decisions that make sense for them.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying this idea that letting go of control isn't kind of going, right, that's it, I'm not going to have anything to do with any of your decisions anymore, see you later, good luck out there. That's not what it looks like at all. You kind of are replacing control with actually kind of more communication and more conversation, more connection. Yes. Yeah, you talk in your book about the really distinct changes you began to see in your children once you centered connection. And I'd love for you to tell people about that.
So I feel like because my early years of parenting were very punitive and were very focused on behavior, that there were a lot of power struggles and a lot of tension. And I think once I shifted to like really just showing love and connection and just building trust and relationship with them, that a lot of the behavior things really just resolved themselves. Because what we know is that, you know, behaviors are attempts to get needs met. And so if I am meeting those needs without them needing to behave in certain ways, then they no longer need to engage in those behaviors, right? So I think just spending time with them. There was a point in my relationship with my child where I I was hard pressed to find positive moments throughout the day with him. Like I would look throughout the day and I was like, I am losing joy in this relationship. I do not feel that connection and that joy with him anymore. And so I knew that I needed to do a lot of healing in that area so that we could create more positive interactions between us, because there were so many negative negative interactions, that's sort of like what defined our relationship at that point. And then so needing to find very intentional ways to heal that, to build trust, to just build more joy back into our relationship, you know. So I talk in the book about just having like a special time with each child. And I think especially in the early years as I was transitioning away from tiger parenting, that was very healing for my relationship with my oldest son in particular. Just where I set aside time to intentionally express just presence with him and pleasure, and that we would create this time together where we enjoyed each other and we're having fun and creating positive memories. And so I think that really built a lot of trust. And so a lot of the, you know, the unpleasant behaviors that I was seeing sort of fell away, because then he could more freely communicate them to me, you know, and it was safer for him to talk to me about things that were bothering him um, instead of, you know, expecting me to come down hard on him or to punish him in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. I think that will really resonate with a lot of people, this idea that you can kind of get locked into certain dynamics, you know, but that you can actually bring in a different intention and really see a transformation of those dynamics, where it's like you're just like the nagging grumpy parent and they're like, you really can totally transform that relationship. So thank you for that really beautiful example of you doing that. Just open up a little bit of a chance for you to talk about your personal kind of move into unschooling, but then also if you feel inclined to talk about what you think unschooling means for the whole world, like the kind of potential generational shifts when we move from a kind of institutionalized education to a more self-directed model.
Oh, I think unschooling has been really transformative to me and has really deepened this peaceful parenting practice, because I do think that it's just unschooling, in fact, is just peaceful parenting that we apply to all areas of our lives, you know, especially in the area of education. Whereas like sometimes we feel like we can peacefully parent in this area and honor our kids' autonomy and respect them in this area. But education, we still need control over, you know, we still need our hand in it and to guide them and to tell them and to have these, you know, standards. And so I think unschooling really challenged that for me. Whereas like, why do I believe that these principles are true in these other areas? And yet it's so hard for me to practice them in this area of education. and realizing how much of that was fear-based, how much of that was just, caught in this schoolish mindset, because most of us have grown up in that system. So it's hard for us to imagine a different way. But my journey was, I was living in China at that time. My kids, our educational options were actually limited because we were foreigners living in China. They couldn't attend the local schools, and the international schools were way too expensive for us. And so we were just exploring different options, and homeschooling was obviously one of them. But I knew, because of my tiger parenting tendencies, that I didn't want to homeschool in a way that was super controlling, because then I would be that person. I would be that crazy mom that would always be on their backs. And I knew that that would just really destroy our relationship. And so I was, looking around for other options, like how else can I do this in a way that feels good for our whole family. And that's when I discovered unschooling. And once I learned more about it, it just resonated so much with me in terms of the belief that our kids are natural learners, that they are intrinsically motivated when they have the freedom to self-direct their learning. All these different ideas that really resonated with me and challenged me, in the way that I saw children. So I think, because I'm the type of person that, like, once I resonate and believe in it, like intellectually, I try to jump all in. And so, yeah. And so I just jumped into it. And I mean, it's still a process, the deschooling is still very much a process. But we have been unschooling for about 3-4 years now. And I just, there's definitely moments of anxiety, when I freak out, because as my kids get older, it feels like the gap is becoming bigger in terms of what they're learning in life and what kids in schools are learning. And yet I can see so much that just their self-motivation, their passions, their interests, like they are pursuing the things that they love to do. They have control over how they spend their time. And we talk about, if they want to set goals, how they can reach their goals. So it's a very supportive and empowering way to just be in relationship with them. And especially during this time where so many families are pandemic schooling, I'm so grateful that we have chosen this way of life, because just not having to deal with those power struggles, not having to deal with trying to enforce some random person's expectations onto my kids. So I'm really thankful for that. I think in terms of like the bigger, influence of unschooling, I think, we talk a lot about decolonizing our education, and so much of education has been controlled by those with the most power, right? So that they are teaching us the things that they want us to learn based on their values and what they think is important. And I think what we're finding is that it's really important not just to hear from the people who have the most power, but to hear from those who are the most vulnerable and those who are marginalized. And how can we amplify those voices, amplify those stories? And so unschooling is really about opening up our world so that we can have access to all those different voices, instead of just hearing the voices and the ideas of those who have the most power. And empowering our kids to question, to think their own thoughts, because there isn't somebody who gives you a bad grade if you don't give them the answer that they want, right? Our kids have the freedom to think their own thoughts, have the freedom to push back, to question, to discern whether or not something is true or not. Yeah, whereas in the classroom setting, there's usually a right answer, you know, an expected answer, and you're not really allowed to question or push back or present a different narrative. And so teaching the next generation to be these free thinkers who can question, who can push back against systems and authorities that are oppressive, I think that's, you know, definitely the power of unschooling as well.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, that right and wrong answer. I was in a weekend gathering where somebody was doing some teaching and would like ask us questions about what they'd just taught. And it was so interesting to me because I haven't really been in an environment like that for many years. And I was so amazed that everybody was so willing to put their hands up and answer the question. I was just like, oh my God, I would never try and answer a question. I'm probably going to be wrong. And nearly always I had the right question because they were very easy questions. But it just was kind of hilarious to me to see how quickly I dropped into like, I will never open my mouth in this scary classroom setting, even though I spend the majority of every day kind of floating out ideas, trying new things, like considering this from this angle and just giving everything a crack. And then as soon as there was any essence of a kind of hierarchy of knowledge and kind of right and wrong, I just completely froze and went back into like my tiny child self. And yeah, it was just a really strong reminder of, you know, because we haven't really been, my kids have never been to school. We're so outside of that paradigm, you know, that it was a really good reminder of kind of how it just doesn't bring out the best in many individuals and certainly in a group. Yeah, and just the age of your children, I think, did you say 10 and 12 now?
Yes.
Yeah, that is a traditional wobble. Yeah, I call them kind of unschooling wobbles, and it's because in the school they're basically downloading masses of information at that point, and they kind of do this great big leap in the classroom where they're learning all of the ancient histories and all the monarchies in England and every chemical, you know, they're kind of just downloading loads and loads of information. So there is often a little bit of a wobble around that exact age where it feels like my kid just spends 7 hours building or you know, looking at swords, you know, and it can feel a bit, yeah.
Yeah. So what is your advice to people who wobble? Because I had a big wobble a few months ago.
Yeah, so it's all about hanging in there basically, and having a solid as befriending your fear process, which is about just listening to your fear, naming it, talking to it tenderly and loving it and saying, you know, we're going to be okay, whilst alongside leaning into what you really know to be true, which is what you've explained. You know, it is, you know, your children have the amazing opportunity to just be pursuing their genuine passion. So leaning in hard to your values and your principles around this, whilst, you know, not being like, oh no, I'm not scared, this isn't a wobble, no, everything's fine. Going, yeah, I hear that part of you that, you know, you've protected me for a long time, you know, and I can hear what you're trying to do for me here. And
yes, just, I love that. Just compassion towards our fear. I think for me, like that point when that anxiety came up for me was when I began comparing, you know, when I, for some reason, you know, saw what other kids that age were doing, and then that really sort of brought up, oh my goodness, like maybe my kids should be doing more or whatever. So I think that comparison piece was what triggered it a lot for me.
Yeah, it's really easy for me because I can remember exactly 3 things from my entire high school experience. So when I think about all those kids downloading all of that information, I'm like, I did that. I sat there for hours and hours, kind of, you know, technically downloading information. And now I can remember nothing.
It's true. It's true.
So yeah, I'm kind of like, they might be downloading all of this information and it's just probably going to disappear.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Iris, it has been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for this conversation. Yeah, I hope that your book just goes out far and wide, because it is exactly a book for this moment in time. And I just love that you listened, you heard the call to write the book, you got your head down, wrote the book, and now we have the fruits of your labor. And I'm sure it's going to make just gigantic waves for people. And so yeah, really encourage viewers to get Untigering. I guess it's available everywhere, right?
Everywhere on Amazon. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, cool. Amazing. Thank you so much. And
thank you so much.
yeah, hope to connect with you soon.